This podcast is brought to you by Bloomberg Law. For more information about our professional services for the legal industry, please call 212-617-6569.
This is the Bloomberg Law Podcast. I'm Josh Block. Facebook filed to sell shares of stock to the public last week, but as law professor Lori Andrews pointed out in an opinion piece, Facebook, unlike other big-time corporations, doesn't have an inventory of widgets. They don't have smartphones or other gadgets to sell. No, Facebook's inventory that makes it worth an estimated $75 billion is the personal data they've collected on you and me. I'm joined now by Professor Lori Andrews. Professor Andrews, what makes a company like Facebook or Google so valuable?
Many people feel like they're using Facebook, but actually Facebook is using them. Facebook makes its money by selling ads that are targeted based on personal information that you put up on your Facebook page.
Here's how I think many people view ads on Facebook. I search for something that I like, say a band like Superchunk. I find their Facebook page. I click the thumbs up like button. Now, Facebook and advertisers know that I like Superchunk, and when the band visits my town or when they release a new CD, I'll be targeted and I'll know that the concert is coming in advance. I'll get tickets. So what's wrong with that? Explain what I'm missing about the way liking something on Facebook works. What's the hidden side of liking something?
Okay, well, one thing is we should note you get all those benefits with an opt-in system. Since you're going to the Superchunk website to begin with, they could have something that said, hey, want to know when we're coming to town? Click here. But what happens is that information is linked to other information for you, and here's the real problem. If it turns out that Superchunk fans are less likely to pay their credit card bills, the next time you go on a credit card website, you may be offered something with a very high interest rate or a very low, a low amount that you can charge. And so information is being used not only to give you benefits, but in what I and others have referred to as web-lining, as a chance to deny you benefits as well.
If I like Superchunk, and if people who like Superchunk often don't pay their bills, and a credit card company finds that out and they use that against me, to some degree, that's great for the credit card company? They have added...
That's not so great for you, and you weren't told, by going on Facebook, you might lose your credit card possibility, your employment possibility, and so forth. So you've bought into that, oftentimes without knowing the ramifications. And if you were someone who signed up when it was just in the first stages and the Ivy Leagues and so forth, you signed up under a privacy policy that said, we don't give your information to anybody but your indicated friends. And then in 2009, Facebook pulled the rug out from under that and took previously private information like the pictures and names of your friends and made them public. And it has had drastic ramifications. So it turns out that some U.S. critics of the Iranian government had relatives and friends in Tehran. And all of a sudden those pictures became visible, and their relatives were in Iran were arrested, beat up, and so forth. So innocuous things that you actually were promised would be kept private, have become public with a quick change in code on the part of Facebook.
Tell me more about how this works with Google, their ads and their data that they collect about me, especially in light of their new privacy policy, which cuts across all Google properties, including YouTube.
Google actually uses algorithms which key into words on private emails, and if you use Gmail. And so say I'm corresponding with a divorce lawyer, or say I'm corresponding with my psychiatrist about anxiety. It could be that later I'll be watching a YouTube video with my son, and an ad will pop up for a divorce lawyer or for depression. Now, once people realize these are targeted based on searches you've done, they're very revealing. A woman called me who works at a law firm yesterday and said she was trying to print things off for the firm, and she'd done some searches about medical conditions there, and this kept popping up where other people could see when she was bringing up the information that she needed for the law firm.
How does this work with sites that are less obviously collecting data and the cookies that they're planting on your internet browser? I think you talked about dictionary.com, going to dictionary.com to look up a word, But dictionary.com ends up with much more info about you than just the words you can't spell and don't know the meaning of.
Yeah, and so I write books. This is my 14th book, and so I love dictionary.com. But they do put, according to a Wall Street Journal article, 233 cookies on your computer. So it's hard to argue that you're consenting to that. I had no idea, and still I started doing research for this book about the fact that they did that. And what's happened when annoyed consumers have sued and said, oh, this violates the federal wiretap statute and the Federal Consumer Fraud and Abuse Act, judges have said, as long as one side gives consent, that's an exception to the statute. And so, amazingly, the fact that dictionary.com gave consent to the sale of my personal information means that the company doesn't have to get my consent. I just think that's a wrong-headed decision. It came out of a 2001 decision when we had much less of this tracking, a decision called DoubleClick. And I think it could have gone the other way because that same federal law says you can't use one-party consent if the party consenting is committing a tort or a crime. Of course, otherwise hackers could just say, oh, I gave consent to copy Lori Andrews' Social Security number and credit card number and use it. And so the judge could have said, this invades people's privacy, but didn't. So I think we need a reversal of that sort of decision. Judges are just throwing up their hands and saying things like, your right to privacy is lost on an affirmative keystroke. I don't think people think that. I mean, I am deluded to think that when a website tells me my credit card number is protected, that indeed this is a private transaction and so forth. That when I email my doctor, that's privately protected. But, one New York judge said emails are just like postcards. They're public information.
We have an expectation of privacy with the things we do on the internet, but are we naive to think that? Are we naive to think that anything we do on the internet is private? Is there anything that we do on the internet that we really should expect is private? And it seems a little like finally now, some 28 years later, after 1984, George Orwell was right.
Oh man, it's so true. You've got a data aggregator like Axiom with 1,500 pieces of information on 96% of Americans. It is, Big Brother. And imagine if the government had tried to get that information. As one computer analyst has said, they would have needed money, they would have needed lawyers, they might have even needed guns. Yet we're coughing up this information to social networks and other websites all the time. So one of the questions is, should it no longer be considered private? And I don't think so. I think just because we've disclosed it in a setting, my disclosures to my physician are still considered private, even though I've let somebody into that conversation. So why is it if I email something about my health condition to my doctor, all of a sudden that's fair game for a Google ad analysis? We should have the same protections online as we do offline. Maybe what we need are laws that say no discriminatory uses. That schools can't look at students' Facebook pages and that employers can't get access to employees' Facebook pages.
The U.S. does not have laws that give people the right to know what data companies have collected about them, but that's not so in Europe. What laws do other nations have to protect personal data information, and how do those laws work? So
Europe has responded by giving people a right to know what companies have about them. And so a law student in Austria was able to exercise that right against Facebook and, get the data Facebook had on him. And he got in the mail a CD-ROM with 1,200 PDFs on it where he could see that they were still keeping data that he had deleted and really had tracked, everything he'd done through Facebook. You also have a right to correct information if adverse decisions are being made against you.
And a right to delete as well?
Various politicians in the European communities are talking about a right to be forgotten. If you think about that in the United States, we really were a society formed with the idea you could reinvent yourself, and we have laws. That's why people came over to the United States and founded a country. We have bankruptcy laws that allow you to reinvent yourself in that way. But here, data on the internet stays forever.
You wrote about passing a do not track law. If you could have your ideal internet data protection law passed, what would it look like? Because I have a sense you'd go further than just a do not track law.
Yeah, I really do believe in opt-in instead of opt-out. So to me, it's like I come home, there are 20 strangers in my house, and I have to ask them individually to leave. That's like dictionary.com. I have to figure out they put cookies on. I have to go to their websites and opt out. And so I would have the opt-in thing where you could go on the button on Superchunk's website and tell them you want to hear about upcoming shows rather than the assumption being that you want your data to be used in a certain way.
And you'd have that legislated. You'd have an actual law that mandates that.
Yeah. I would also declare, since you made me czar of the universe, or at least U.S. law, that social network pages are private sites. Part of my concern is I think there are huge, huge benefits. One of the things you mentioned is bands. They can find an audience there. There are great crowdsourcing projects going on in science. People really develop their identities in many instances through social networks. I think there are great social networks like Patients Like Me, where patients, where people who are separated by distance or have rare diseases can get advice from other people in that same situation. But what happened with Patients Like Me, people were posting, I feel depressed or I have Huntington's disease, and getting advice from others and talking about what treatment worked for them and didn't. And then Nielsen, a data aggregator, used a bot to collect all that information. All of a sudden, people just started taking down their posts and not posting. So the problem is that if we don't protect privacy and freedom of expression here, we're not going to get the benefits of social networks. And my concern is people will start branding themselves since birth.
Are there other solutions out there outside of legislating this?
There's some technology potentials. We're not there yet, but even something seemingly as minor as coding pictures so they self-destruct in 2 years. So you could do that so your drunken hot tub photos aren't out there 4 years later when you graduate from college. I also look at patent applications to see what's coming down the pike in this area, and there are fewer privacy-enhancing technologies than there are privacy-invading technologies.
Because of the great value in collecting this data.
Yeah, and so I looked at a recent patent for the Peak U technology, and what they would do is if you're walking down the street and in New York, where you are, and I take a picture of you on an iPhone, they would do an immediate facial recognition web search to pull up your blog, to pull up the videos you've done in the podcast, and if you have a profile on a dating site, and what pictures you might have posted on photo sites, and if you have a public Facebook profile and so forth. So this immediate information would be available about everyone.
That sounds like a science fiction, like Minority Report, or I feel like I've seen that in a movie. Do you have a sense that there's any momentum building to have a law like the ones you're suggesting passed?
I think in part what has happened is that, people don't realize this is going on. I think once it's revealed, people might raise more concerns. And at one point, the people who tend to benefit from this, so the Facebook officials, the Google officials, were all saying privacy's dead, get over it, that this next generation isn't going to care about privacy at all, look at all the daily things they're posting. Well, it turns out that younger people, 18 to 29, actually care the most about social network privacy. And so I see some potential for, movement there in the fact that, The vast majority of Americans don't want to be online tracked, according to surveys. 71% of young people use the highest privacy settings. It's a value that's been around for a long time. It serves individual and social purposes, and so I think we may see more movement in that area.
That's Lori Andrews, law professor at Chicago-Kent College of Law and the author of I Know Who You Are and I Saw What You Did, Social Networks and the Death of Privacy. You can find more of our podcasts on the Bloomberg Law YouTube channel. Thanks for listening.
Copyright 2012 Bloomberg Finance LP, all rights reserved. The views expressed herein are those of the speakers and not of Bloomberg Finance LP. These discussions are for informational purposes only and should not be construed as legal advice, which has to be addressed to particular facts and circumstances involved in any given situation. Bloomberg Finance LP and its affiliated entities do not take any responsibility for the content contained herein and do not make any representation or warranty as to its completeness or accuracy.